Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this rally for Jeremy, my friend and comrade who's come to Luton. This is a wonderful occasion already, I think, with the number of people who turned up. And we have a great tradition of famous speakers of the left coming to Luton. 1949, we had 9/11. Later on, we had Michael Foot, we had Tony Benn, and now we've got Jeremy Corbyn. So it gives me the greatest pleasure indeed to ask Jeremy to now address us for a little while. We have a format after that where I shall explain that we're going to have sort of questions in sections on particular areas of policy. But I shall be as fair as I possibly can when asking questions. Before I tell you all, Jeremy.
I came here to save Corbyn from falling over and to make sure the electricity worked. Friends, thank you very, very much for inviting me here tonight, and thank you for all the participation that everyone's doing in this Labour Party leadership election campaign, because it is incredible the number of people that are turning out at the hustings events and at public meetings like this. They are literally thousands and thousands of people in every part of the country. And what it shows to me is that this whole debate and discussion has unlocked a thirst for a debate about the political direction of this country, and also, of course, particularly a debate about the political direction of the Labour Party and its ability to represent the aspirations of ordinary people. I'm absolutely delighted and very proud to be here alongside my friend Kelvin Hopkins. Kelvin and I have been great friends for a very long time. On dark winter's nights we talk about the history of the railways of this country, and on other days we talk about the history of the trams of this country, and other days we talk again about the railways. But tonight I'm saying nothing more about railways or trams than that, but we share an interest in that matter. And in every election I've come to Luton to speak to Kelvin because he's a decent, honourable man, he's a decent man who genuinely represents the entire community and is fearless in Parliament and speaking up for what he believes to be right and what he believes to be right for the working people of this country, the oppressed and the downtrodden, and he is a brilliant representative of all of you in Parliament. I'm sure you'd agree with that. I was very, very depressed on May the 8th when the election results came through. Indeed, on May the 7th, I went along to the count in my own constituency, and we had an excellent result. We had the highest votes on the highest turnout and the highest majority we've ever had in the history of my particular borough. So we were feeling very confident. And whilst the election campaign had its ups and downs, and clearly nobody was predicting an overall Labour majority, we thought we'd do better than we did. And then friends started sending me texts of the exit polls in other parts of the country. But to begin with, I thought it was the sort of arcane humour that people have to give you bad news when they meant good news, but it wasn't to be. It was the very opposite. And so the election result has brought us a Conservative government with a small overall majority. And I'll go on in a moment to describe what I think of them and what their strategy is. But what I think the problem was with Labour was that whilst we did have some very good policies, the zero-hours contract policies were good, much of what was in the manifesto on details of social policy and administration was very good, but fundamentally there was a problem that even had a Labour government been elected, that government would have been making cuts in local authority budgets, would have been making cuts in central government expenditure, and there would have been people losing their jobs because we'd accepted an arbitrary date to move into budget surplus, because we'd accepted the principles of the austerity programme which is meant to solve the economic problems of Britain. And so I think along with Corbyn and others, we challenged afterwards, within the Parliamentary Labour Party, the need to have a leadership election, when quite clearly the party needed to have a serious debate about what its economic strategy and policy actually was. It wasn't to be. The National Executive, which has infinite wisdom, and its wisdom is infinite, and they showed us their wisdom is totally infinite by rejecting its entirety, what we put to them, and went ahead with a leadership contest. We then discussed how we could influence that leadership contest. There is a very high bar. 35 Labour MPs have to sign the nomination papers of anyone to be a candidate, and we chewed this around for some time, whether or not we could find the necessary support for anyone to be a candidate. And eventually, we decided we would give it a go. And when we gave it a go, eventually we got 11 signatures. That was great, but it was nowhere near 35. But there was a mad rush one day when it went up to 12. That was when I nominated myself. And then after that, it began to grow a little bit more. But even by the Sunday evening, on the eve of the close of nominations, we were still only on 18. We got that up a bit more the next morning. But something very interesting happened then. We had been getting more and more coverage of what we were trying to say. We were challenging this austerity orthodoxy, and we were challenging the issues of democracy in the party and the role of our party in our society. And this took off on the social media. And so this campaign is actually very much about the influence of ordinary people through social media, influencing and encouraging members of Parliament to do something which allowed this democratic debate to take place. And so I say two things. Thanks to all those that took part in that essentially online debate for about a week. But thanks also to the members of Parliament who nominated me, even though they don't necessarily agree with my views, and I apologise to them if they've been called abusive names by other people. I personally don't use abuse to anybody at any time, never have, never will, not the style of doing things. I believe in discussing ideas, policies and philosophy, not trading in personal abuse. It's that which puts people off politics, not brings them in. And since then, we've had a huge increase in activity and support. Thousands of people have signed up to our website, to our Facebook, to our Twitter, and have attended huge numbers of meetings everywhere, in every town all over the country. And we have done, in the last 6 weeks or so, we've done 40 public meetings and 20 hustings all around the country, as well as a whole host of online interviews and online stuff that we're doing. And what it's about is this. Two things really. One is this Conservative government has thrown down a gauntlet of what it's about. The budget. I mean, think about it. This budget is doing a number of things. There isn't time to go through it all. One is it's selling off £30 billion worth of state assets in 1 year. That is almost double the amount Margaret Thatcher sold off at the height of her government in the 1980s in 1 year. They call me a throwback to the 80s. They should think about what the slot really are. And secondly, they should also consider the other aspects of this budget. Lowering corporation tax, taking benefits away from the children of any family that's beyond 2 children, taking away maintenance grants for students from poorer families. The whole thing is some kind of anti-youth direction. Also forcing local authorities to sell property, excuse me, forcing housing associations to sell property, and will lead to a greater division in this country, not dealing with the issues that we're actually facing. And then we have the welfare reform bill, rather oddly named reform bill. It's interesting how the Conservatives always adopt the language of the left and turn it on its head, as though somehow it's a radical thing to do. Thatcher did it with freedom. They now do it with reform. They now do it with liberty. The liberty to exploit people, the reform to take away all that's good, and the freedom to exploit others. Well, let's turn it around the other way. This welfare reform bill is nasty in its concept and its ideas, taking away £12 billion in expenditure, which ought to be helping the poorest people in this country. It's maintaining a system where essentially a large proportion of public expenditure goes to a twin-track approach of subsidising low wages and subsidising high rents in the private rented sector. And instead of addressing those problems, it does the very opposite. It punishes the people who are the victims of low wages and the victims of high rents in the private rented sector. And so, Kelvin and I absolutely oppose the welfare reform bill and will continue to absolutely oppose the welfare reform bill. Whatever the outcome of this election campaign. And I think we need to consider a few things about ourselves and the kind of society we want to live in. If I asked you, I won't, but if I asked you all to put your hands up and say, do you support the principle of a national health service free at the point of use as a human right, I'm pretty sure every single hand would go up in this room. Okay, it's already started. I can see the Mexican wave coming, it's okay. I get it. But if I asked for a second show of hands, say, do you believe that Britain should have and could afford to have a welfare state that ensured that nobody lived in destitution and nobody was left to die and beg on the streets of this country, would you also put your hands up for that? I think in this audience you probably would. But in the 1940s, and we're now celebrating 2 days ago the anniversary of the election of the 1945 Labour government, it was a fundamental principle that the welfare state eliminated destitution and the health service ensured people were healthy, and the role of society, government if you like, was to ensure that people were decently fed, decently clothed, decently housed and kept in good health, and they would run the economy which ensured there was full employment. They achieved all of those things despite having a debt ratio of 250% at the time. We now have a debt ratio of 80%, which is significantly different, significantly less. And so, I make no bones about it. Part of this campaign is about saying the kind of society we want to live in. What the Tories are doing is moving in absolutely the opposite direction. The privatisation of large sections of the National Health Service, the encouragement of an internal market in England of the National Health Service, the encouragement of private medicine, the encouragement of an individual welfare state through individual insurance schemes, which the Prime Minister was openly talking about only 2 weeks ago, which fundamentally undermines everything that we believe in. So is it wrong? Is it out of date? Are we totally off our heads if we say we think there's something good about a society that is dedicated to getting rid of the worst vestiges and the most grotesque extremes of poverty within our society? That is what I believe is possible. That is the principal point that I'm trying to put forward in this election campaign and the principal message that we're trying to give to the Labour Party in this. Why do we have to run away in fear because various newspapers decide to run stories on Benefit Street rather than on Desperation Street, where so many people are being evicted from their homes and so many people end up begging on seaside towns all along the south coast in summer? I don't want to live in that kind of society. I don't believe it's necessary. I believe we can, should, and must do a lot better, and be proud to do it as well. But what this government is doing is, of course, the very opposite of any of that. Take housing, for example. There is a housing crisis in Britain. I see it every day in my constituency, where there's insufficient council housing. Therefore, the council, to fulfil its housing authority duties, has to place people in the private rented sector. Those people placed in the private rental sector get charged a great deal in rents. The benefit cap comes in. The benefit cap doesn't meet the rent level, so they get exported out of the borough to somewhere else. Some come here to Luton, they get sent elsewhere, they get sent all over the whole country. And that means social disruption, it means disruption of children's lives, it means disruption of communities. And is it right that we've got a whole generation of children being brought up living in private rented sector accommodation on 6-month contracts? They don't know, in some cases, which school, which town, where they're going to be living in 6 months' time. There's something very bad about denying children the basic security that we all want for ourselves. The response of the government ought to be build more council houses, ought to be regulate the private rented sector, ought to be protect those properties that are owned by housing associations. But instead, they're offering tax breaks to continue the expansion of the private rented sector without any levels of rent regulation. They're allowing a permitted development scheme to go ahead which converts any industrial office building into housing without the need for any planning permission, therefore with no access to any social housing within that. And they're forcing councils in high-cost areas like mine in London to sell off any property worth over £400,000. The obscenity of it is, we've just completed in my borough a very nice development on the Caledonian Road, 25 very nice flats for families to move into. The government wants us to sell them now, off-plan, to an overseas buyer in order for them to move it into the private rented sector. What message is that to children living in grossly overcrowded accommodation at the moment who deserve somewhere decent to live and are pleased that we've got a council that's trying to provide it for them? That's the second thing of the government. And the third is the forced sale of housing association properties. I've no idea what they think they're going to achieve by this. By forcing the sale of those housing association properties, all will happen, as was happened with the huge sale of council properties, is you lower the level of stock, you increase the level of private sector demand, you push up private sector rents, you push up levels of misery, and you create a greater housing crisis for the future. Don't you think it's time for a bit of government intervention on the principle we should be managing the housing stock of the whole country, including those places deliberately kept empty by land banking in order to make money out of them, to ensure that everyone can get somewhere decent to live and no child should be living in insecurity and nobody should be sleeping on the street? Is it such a big ask in the fourth richest country in the world that we achieve that? I think not. Area of policy which I think we have to look at, well, there's lots of areas we can look at, but there isn't time to look at all of them tonight, is what we do for an economic policy and how we change things for the future. Because there are too many people working below their skill level, there are too many people working on short-term contracts, on zero-hours contracts, or underemployed, and certainly too little investment in manufacturing industry and development of high-skilled jobs in Britain. So we put forward a serious economic policy which is about challenging austerity, is about borrowing yes, for housing and for infrastructure development and for industrial development, because the more you invest in and grow the economy, a high-skilled economy, this area, this town, for example, is a place that's seen all kinds of industries come, some have gone. There are huge levels of skills in the whole area that have made cars, that have made planes, that have made all sorts of things. Some of those people, sadly, now not employed in those industries because those industries have declined. Their skills are still there, the innovation is still there, the possibilities are still there. Should we be so afraid of government intervening to do joint enterprises, all kinds of things, in order to grow and develop the economy? And if we want to deal with the environmental crisis, and we have to and we will, then you also have to invest in more environmentally friendly transport systems. You also have to invest in environmentally appropriate energy systems. We have all those skills in this country. But the failure of government to sufficiently invest in and support these means that we are missing a very, very big trick here. So we're suggesting a national investment bank that will promote these kind of developments, promote this kind of industry, and be a real motor for the growth of the economy, which in turn increases employment, that in turn increases levels of taxation. If this is described as something that's ludicrously fantasist, it's the kind of policies that most European governments, particularly Germany, have been following for a very long time. It's not that unusual. But we've become obsessed with the idea that the banking crisis of 2008 was somehow or other caused by government overspending, where in reality, the last Labour government, whilst it did very good things in children's centres, Sure Start, hospital waiting times and issues like that, it did not spend excessive amounts of money. My big criticism on its economic performance was getting far too involved with contracting and privatisation in the public service, and absolutely wrongly getting involved in private finance initiatives, which have become a millstone around the necks of so many hospitals. We're putting forward the view that a national investment bank should be able to take over those issues and run an investment programme in a very, very different way. So in a sense, we're offering a twin approach. A society that is inclusive and cares for all. We all care for each other, everyone cares for everyone else. It's not complicated, it's a pretty basic human need and human philosophy. I call it socialism, you can call it anything you like, but that to me seems to be quite a sensible rubric on which you start your programme in government. And you develop your society, develop your economy, and you unleash the potential of young people. And that moves me on to the other scandal of our age. Corbyn is the same age as me. No, Corbyn, not a word. Not a word. Please, we're friends. We have the opportunity of free school education, free university education, and full employment. I remember when I left school, somebody tutted and said it was a total scandal that one boy in my class had to wait 2 weeks before he got a job. And this was thought to be really shocking. He didn't think it was shocking at all, but everybody else apparently thought it was really shocking. And with the opportunity of free university education. I didn't take the opportunity, I was not playing any hardship, that was my choice. But I could have got free degree and gone on to do whatever with that free degree. Somewhere along the line we went very wrong. We introduced fees of £1,000 a year. We voted against that. Then it went to £3,000 a year. We voted against that. Then it went to £9,000 a year. We absolutely voted against that. And now, some of the pressure is that we lift the cap altogether on university fees. So we'll end up with Oxbridge charging 20,000, whatever they can get away with, and the university is becoming totally unaffordable for anyone except those that either have a huge bank of mum and dad, a lot of inherited money from somewhere else, lucky enough to get a scholarship, or simply unable to go there. We'll end up with something that resembles the American university system. Yes, there are brilliant, huge, fantastic universities in the USA, but they're not open for everybody. Everybody can't go there because you only hear about the success of those that go there. You never hear about the thousands who can't get in and don't go there. And so we've done some calculations on this, and I have a wish that I want to get rid of the whole university fee structure and return to the principle of public support for students to go to university and not have to pay tuition fees. And it would cost an increase, yes, an increase, in corporation tax of 0.5%. That would pay for it. I think it's a price worth paying. Much more support for all universities and particularly for colleges, because colleges are suffering a funding crisis at the present time. Our students are suffering because of that, and the insecurity of the work in the colleges is also suffering as a result of that whole process. And so I think it's important that we underpin a high-quality education service and real opportunities for every student to get vocational qualifications or to go to university. To me, that is very important. Now, I think people should learn because they want to learn, and learn because they want to be qualified, and learn because they want to achieve, not just for themselves, but for everybody else. If somebody is a good quality engineer, my train journey is safer. If somebody is a good quality mechanic, your flight is safer. If your cancer is going to be identified quick, it's a good doctor that does it and identifies it. We all benefit from a well-educated, well-qualified society. There is no security in denying the brilliance of many students from poorer families the right to go to university and to learn. What is it with these people in the Tory party that all they can think about is locking out opportunity for poor and working class families and promoting it for everybody else? I think we should promote good quality education access for everybody, irrespective of where they come from. That surely is something that's well worth campaigning. As you probably noticed, I have been consulting the NHS over the past few days about the state of my throat. Unfortunately, they've diagnosed a solution which is impossible, which is that I don't do anything for the next 3 weeks. And I said that isn't an option. The Enclosure Acts have taken away the farmland and the opportunity to any rural work. That was the whole process that led about to the growth of socialist thought and radical ideas at the end of the 19th and early 20th century. They wanted political representation of the working class, hence the Labour Party was founded. And it's achieved fantastic things. The welfare state, the National Health Service, the Human Rights Act, the Equalities Act, all the progressive legislation to outlaw discrimination and give respect and decency within our society, and to absolutely outlaw racism in any form, has all come from pressure via, through, and on the Labour Party to achieve that in Parliament. So we've got a lot that we can be proud of. And I want us to always be able to be proud of those things. But we've also got to recognise we've made some appalling mistakes. The worst appalling mistake, certainly at the time that I was in Parliament, was when we were told there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. There weren't weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. We went to war, thousands died, billions were spent, and one war begets another war, begets another war, begets another war. And I would much prefer that a Labour government dedicated itself to justice, to peace, to human rights around the world, rather than saw itself as an outrider of US foreign policy and the intervention all over the place. I'm not pretending there aren't some horrible issues going on. And there are some very difficult issues we face. I'm very well aware of that. I've visited many of the countries that are going through the most dreadful conflicts at the moment. I've been in Israel, I've been in Palestine, I've been in Lebanon, I've been in Syria, I've been in most of the countries in North Africa at some point in the recent past. I'm not pretending any of it is easy. But I do not see how renewed bombing with unclear alliances with unclear allies is actually going to do anything other than kill a lot of innocent civilians, provoke more recruitment to the most nihilistic forces within the region, and make the world an infinitely more dangerous place. War is reported by historians who write on behalf of the victors. What is not written is the real victims of war. Those people dying in the Mediterranean now, those 500 million living in dreadful refugee camps in Libya, those people that are making heroic journeys to try and get to a place of safety with them and their children all across the Middle East and Africa. I'm not saying we can solve every problem, no, I know we can't. But if we start from the basis that we have a government that wants to ensure there is a world at peace rather than a world at war, that we're not pouring arms into governments that we know are going to invade their neighbours, that we're not so flooding the region with arms we've no idea where they're going to end up with, and instead we're more interested in humanitarian support, in adhering to international law and human rights. I think that would be an important step forward. And so Kelvin and I voted against the Iraq War, voted against what went with it, and we believe the enormous damage that it did to the Labour Party is something I never ever want to see again. And I will always be. This campaign that we're running now has been quite amazing, because we started in June with absolutely nothing except 35, but we turned out to be 36 signatures on a piece of paper. One came in my email we hadn't been told about. And we started off with absolutely nothing and went straight off to the hustings and the public meetings. We now have thousands and thousands of people all over the country at meetings like this, showing a real thirst for politics, for a change in our society, for the release of the enthusiasm, strength and energy of young people, for a vision of a world that's more environmentally sustainable, for a vision of a world that is at peace, and an economy that works for all, not to develop the most grotesque inequalities that already exist within our society. I don't know what the result of this election is going to be any more than anybody else does. Apparently the Sun newspaper seems to know what the result is, but I'll leave that sophistry to them. But I do know that politics has changed. I do know that after September the 12th, there needs to be a serious debate about exactly what the economic strategy is, exactly what the international strategy is, exactly what the education strategy is, exactly what the welfare strategy is. But it also, something comes to my mind, we can't wait 5 years to change all that. We've got to be out there now protesting about the grotesqueness of this Welfare Reform Act and what it's doing to poor children in large families, what it's doing to young people, what it's doing to the homeless, what it's doing to the most vulnerable people within our society, what the benefits it's taking away from those with disabilities and those with mental health conditions. So maybe our party should become as much a social movement as just a parliamentary-based political party. Because political change in the end comes from what ordinary people want, what ordinary people are trying to achieve. Those chartists that marched through London in the 1840s and 1850s were told, how can you possibly challenge what's going on there? How can you possibly demand a regulation of working hours and pay and education and all these things? Within 50 years, nearly everything they wanted had been achieved. It's people who stepped out into the unknown that brought forward the known, that brought forward basic peace, basic rights, and basic justice in our society. We come together, young, old, black and white, we come together as communities. We come together because we want to see a very different and a very better world. It's not wrong to dream about it. What is wrong is not to do anything about it. This time, we're doing something about it. Thank you very much.
We'll swap over in a minute if you like. What we'll do with this runny up now.
Sadly, he has to be on a train very soon, so we've got until 8 o'clock, which isn't very long for questions.
Oh my goodness, 18 minutes, 16 minutes.
In the Euston Road, so he's got to be on the train and not miss that meeting, otherwise we'll all be in trouble with Diane, which would be terrible. With reason, I think. We had a series of subject areas that Jeremy's going to try and address, but we don't have very much time, and the subjects are economy, domestic and social issues, international environment, and Labour Party internal matters. Now, I'll try and divide the questions up in those areas, and try question. If you could be very brief and give Jerry maximum time to speak, I'd be most grateful. So the first area is his economy, and I'll take the first question on the economy. Yes.
I'd like to know why, where Jeremy stands on the fact of taxation in this country. The gap between the poorest and the richest is just grown, and there seems to be nothing done about it at all. And I just wondered where the Labour Party's been for the last 10 years. We've seen wealth grow under the Labour Party. I haven't been. Obviously, you can't agree with it, can you?
Yeah, okay. We've got a roving mic there. Jim next. Down front here. Anybody else on the economy? And one at the back there as well.
Thank you.
As you put up here, the gentleman.
Great to see you, Jeremy. We first met in 1979 when we were both trade union officers.
Ask the question.
Yeah, question, Jim.
The question I want to put to you. The question I want to put to you is, the economy is not something that the rich has control or domination over. The economy, the life of the economy depends on millions, tens of millions of people contributing on a daily basis in a whole range of activities across the country. I see you as a trade unionist, a strong trade unionist. Too many subjects to cover. Can you cover that a little bit about the trade unions and the Tory attack on trade unions and the working class?
Thank you. There's just a bit of gender balance. The young woman in the front here, if I may.
I'm interested to hear what your thoughts would be in terms of imposing any increase in corporation tax on considering the control which banks and large corporations have over a lot of things within our society now, what do you perceive the backlash to be over any perceived threat to them, albeit perhaps just a 0.5% increase?
Those three questions, Sharon.
On the questions, first of all, on the one on taxation, Richard Murphy, who's a well-known tax expert, has been working with us on a lot of stuff, and he's calculated a low figure of 50 billion a year that's not collected in corporate taxation, and a lot of that is salted away in various convenient tax havens, such as the ones on the shores of this country, such as the Cayman Islands, but also Monaco, Liechtenstein, and of course Switzerland. And so I do think there is a very strong case for closing down that whole stuff about a offshore tax collection arrangement for residents. And whilst Osborne has finally come round to accepting we've got to do something about the non-dom status, I think we can, must and should go an awful lot further on it. There are corporations, big companies, that deliberately offshore their head offices from this country. Boots is the primary example. Move themselves to Switzerland, where the corporation tax rate is 5%, whereas here at the moment it is 20%, and therefore they save a great deal of money on it. The corporation tax rate in the USA is actually higher than here, but there seems to be a trend across Europe of a sort of race to the bottom, where each country tries to lower its corporation tax rate, lower than the one next door, and so on and so on and so on. And who's winning in all that are very big corporations. Who's losing in that is the small businesses. I'll give you an example. There's two coffee shops in Finsbury Park where I live. One is big, shiny and multinational, and the other one is small, very pleasant, and run by a local man who's lived in Britain for 30 years and serves lovely cake, sandwiches and coffee. Who pays the most in tax? I think you all know the answer to that. It's the small man making the cakes and running his own cafe. The other one is offshoring its profits somewhere else. Well, that's simply got to stop. Would there be objections to raising corporation tax? Yeah, I'm sure there would be. But I think we have to make the point that society as a whole benefits if we get more students into university and we end up up and we don't continue with what I believe to be a very unfair burden on young people. I mean, I find it very hard to believe why we should allow young people to graduate at 22 or 23 with debts of £50,000 or £60,000, which is going to take them decades to pay off, and means they can't do much else in their life for a long time except pay off those debts. Tony Benn put it this way once, and I was told we should bring in a graduate tax rather than this. I said, no, I think we should tax people because they're wealthy, not because they're educated. It seems to me a fairly basic There's two other points on that. One is that the Transatlantic Trade Investment Partnership is secretly being negotiated at the present time between the USA and the European Union. I'm very worried and very concerned about this, but it seems to me the ultimate race to the bottom of empowering global corporations over national governments. And if you think that's a bit far-fetched, I am not a particular admirer of the government of Australia. In fact, I'm not an admirer of it at all. But it comes to something when the Philip Morris Corporation take the government of Australia to court because they're trying to have plain packaging of cigarettes, and they might even win the case against the government of Australia. What does that say about democracy anywhere in the world vis-à-vis the power of global corporations? TTIP is that sort of thing written large 1,000 times over. The point Jim made, and Jim, we met in actually 1978, not 1979. Your memory is totally failing you. I'm sorry. Is that okay? We've been great friends ever since. There are 6 million people in this country who are members of trade unions. It's the largest voluntary organisation in the country. People voluntarily join trade unions because they want to protect their conditions, because they want to get advice and help at work, and that the Conservatives really don't like them. And so when they're trying to exercise their democratic right to withdraw their labour at the end of a very long negotiating process, it's going to be made virtually impossible to do it. We as a country pride ourselves on being internationally legally responsible. So why are we in breach of international labour organisation conditions on so many issues? And this new trade union bill that's being introduced will make things even worse. There is a pattern to what they're doing. A budget that redistributes wealth from the poorest to the richest, a welfare bill that takes yet more away from the poorest and most vulnerable and blames them for being the poorest and most vulnerable, and then a trade union bill which prevents trade unionists defending their working conditions or improving their lot in society. I think we've seen it before. I think it was in the 1980s. I think it was a government led by Margaret Thatcher at that time. That is what we're being taken back to. So I think we have to stand up for the liberty of people to join the trade union, the liberty of people enshrined in the ILO Convention, and also, if we may say so, strongly defend our Human Rights Act, all of our Human Rights Act, and our membership of the European and International Universal Convention on Human Rights. If we walk away from a Human Rights Convention, we're in no position to criticise Russia, Hungary, or anybody else.
We've got other sections here, so I'll take questions from other areas, but I go towards the back now. I've had the front. One there, and was one over here somewhere as well, I thought. There's one down here, those two, and the third one there. So 1, 2, 3. Right, okay.
Good afternoon, members. Good afternoon, members. Ozzy and the United Rep from Cambridge. Would you agree with me that cheap labour isn't skilled and skilled labour isn't cheap? And following that, what would you say about the level of Osborne's minimum wage and a supplemental thing? Could you get a picture of me and you take holding a picture of this? We're in controls now. It's Cameron Runley in Cambridge. Thank you very much.
What do you think of the idea of a referendum on cancelling nuclear weapons, getting rid of Trident? We seem to be having a referendum on everything else. And why not that? It's a simple yes and no question.
Thank you. Jonathan Robinson, Prison Reform Campaigner. Mr. Corbyn, thank you for your work today on the Justice Led Committee.
Two things. Should you become leader, which is looking more and more inevitable, could I please request that you make it mandatory that all of your MPs visit prisons at least once a year? The second urgent request is that should you come into power, despite Mr Gove's more than welcome positive noises, could I request that you would immediately lift the bar on journalists entering any prison?
Thanks for those questions. On the first one, from our friend in Cambridge, you're quite right. The Osborne proposed living wage is not a living wage. In fact, it's more or less what the minimum wage would have been by that time anyway. I go along with the figure, which is they think a living wage should be £10 an hour. That living wage would then, of course, obviously lift the living standards of a number of people, a lot of people, but would also actually reduce the level of state subsidy and reduce some of the ludicrous anomalies where you're discouraged from working because of the complexity of benefit income levels, which seems to me that we should be placing the responsibility on employers to pay proper levels of wages and employ sufficient people in the HMRC to ensure that the inspection of the operation of minimum wage is actually efficiently and effectively carried out. We've got the Gangmasters Licensing Authority, which is a good thing, and that was a hard-fought struggle to get it, but there are still areas in some industries where a lot of people are grotesquely exploited, and we still have this very low youth level of minimum wage. I don't quite see why it is that young people need to earn less because it's thought they eat less. It's not. It's never been my experience with young people. And one more point on rent control. I made that point in my contribution. I absolutely do agree with you on that. On the point about nuclear weapons, I am morally and politically opposed to the holding of nuclear weapons. There are 5 declared nuclear weapon states in the world: China, Russia, France, Britain, and the USA. There are 3, maybe 4 other states that have access to nuclear weapons or have them. That's India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea. There's Iran, which has come to an agreement that it will not develop weapons-grade plutonium and will open itself up to full inspection. And I praise those that have brought that negotiation about and brought about that achievement. I hope it's followed up by a weapons of mass destruction free zone conference in the Middle East. I indeed went on an all-party delegation to Iran a year ago to push the issue of nuclear negotiations, but I also spent a week pushing the whole issue of the appalling human rights record of the government of Iran, so that we can support the people there that are what they're going to. So whether we need a referendum or not, I'm not sure, but I do not see the case for replacing Trident in 2016, which we've spent £3 billion already on preparations for it, and this would cost us £100 billion over 25 years of its usage. And a world free of nuclear weapons is actually something we can and should be able to achieve. I went also to the Humanitarian Effects of War, Nuclear War Conference in Vienna a year ago, and it was very interesting. In all the grandeur of the Hofburg Palace in the centre of Vienna, and it's amazingly beautiful grand palace, this was the centre of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. This was the big empire. And the government of Austria's representative opened the conference, not a left-wing government, a conservative government, by saying Austria had no nuclear weapons, would never allow nuclear weapons on its territory, had no aspiration to have nuclear weapons, and wouldn't feel secure if it did, and wanted to provide an opportunity for the rest of the world to realise just how dangerous nuclear weapons were. If Austria can get over its imperial grandeur ideas and promote a conference like that, others can do the same. And so I think when the opportunity comes next year on the vote on climate renewal, we should vote against it, and we should try to ensure that the £100 billion saved is used to invest in high-skill, high-technology engineering, so that those brilliant skills, and they are brilliant skills, that make those weapons and make those submarines, can be making much more useful products. And we are setting up ideas now for a diversification agency, now for investment agency, now for investment in civilian aircraft and all the other things that flow from that possibility. The idea that us having nuclear weapons makes us secure, and I've been told this many times, that is the same argument you can use for any country anywhere in the world. South Africa gave up nuclear weapons, and Abdul Minty, a campaigner against apartheid. I mean, what an amazing reverse of history. I remember Abdul Minty as an anti-apartheid campaigner during the nastiest, most dangerous time of apartheid, on his own here, denouncing what apartheid was about. Eventually, the apartheid regime falls, Nelson Mandela is elected president, nuclear weapons are cancelled and abolished, and at the Humanitarian Effects Conference, Britain and the USA said they'd love to help, but they had to keep nuclear weapons for their own safety. Who followed to speak? Abdul Minty had said, we got rid of nuclear weapons for our safety and for our security, because we feel safer not threatening anybody rather than being in a position to threaten other people. Followed by the foreign minister of the Marshall Islands, a very small country in the Pacific, which has been devastated by nuclear testing. He witnessed nuclear tests as a child, and he is now taking the 5 declared nuclear weapon states to the International Court for the destruction of his country. I cannot, in conscience in any way, support nuclear weapons. I want a world of peace, not one where we threaten to destroy everybody else. Thank you very much. We have a prison population of about 84,000 at the present time. Maybe it's gone up a bit. 85? 87, okay, sorry. Is that today's figure? 87,000. And we have a very high level of reoffending rates, and we particularly have a very high level of youth reoffending rates. And we now have a programme of building more private prisons, including the super prison in North Wales. And precious little seems to be achieved on reducing reoffending rates. I was on the Justice Committee, as we're kind enough to point out, in the last Parliament, and we studied a lot of this, and we went on a visit to Denmark and examined what they in Norway do in a thing called Multifunk, which is a sort of a conglomeration of agencies coming together in small units to support young offenders. And it's not all perfect, it's not all easy, and young people that have committed bad offences are not always easy to deal with. But they have managed to improve their education, improve their approach to society, and end up with a reoffending rate of 17 to 19. MPs to visit prisons? Absolutely yes, because I think it's important that MPs do understand what's going on. Because when you take somebody into custody, you're taking them into custody on behalf of society as a whole. How you treat them is very, very important, and what they do in prison is very, very important. It's not easy, I fully understand all of that, but you have to work surely from the assumption that we're trying to rehabilitate people and bring down the size of the prison population. And maybe use community service orders more, maybe use community issues much more. And we interviewed a group of prisoners who were either just released or they were all just released or some on probation, so we interviewed them in private. And one prisoner, I said, you know, this person had actually served several sentences, 3 in prison and 1 in community service. And I said, which was the toughest? And they said, community service, because somebody was on my case the whole time, and I had to achieve something in life. And so I would want MPs to visit prison. I would want them to engage with young people in prison. Indeed, I've done this myself. I've been to Young Offenders Institutes and women's prisons and sat there with prisoners for quite long, intense discussions. We're not in favour of crime, of course we're not. Nobody's in favour of crime. But if, in a position of political authority, you don't understand the circumstances under which young people get involved in criminal activity, other people get involved in criminal activity, and it goes into a spiral of decline and gets worse and worse, then we're not doing anybody any favours. And so I absolutely agree with your suggestion, and we'll certainly try to implement that and ensuring MPs visit those places, and indeed they should also visit any kind of care establishment, and I'll include in that particularly facilities under the Mental Health Act, because I am concerned about the within our society. I'm going to have to stop now because otherwise Diana will get on our case of both of us. And I think you can imagine what that would be like.
One question.
One very quick question. Then I go to one. Yeah?
Jeremy's for young people. Is the young first in the room?
As you know, the media play a huge part in influencing the vote, and the most popular of these tend to be biased towards the right wing. What I wonder is how you'll be able to counter this. Newspapers have already begun to compare you to Michael Foot to purvey you in a negative manner. How do you plan to stand against this?
Cracking question.
Thanks very much. Thanks for your question. Really good. Really perceptive. Michael Foot was abused grotesquely by the media, as indeed were most other Labour leaders at various times. Michael Foot got singularly abusive and appalling treatment. And you can see what these people do. Two things. One is stick to the politics of it and stick to the issues, never reply to them in time. We have the good fortune to live in an era when there is social media available. We can reach people through a parallel system. We can mobilise and excite people. All those people that stood up, long before any of us in this room were born, to dream of the kind of decent democratic society we all want to live in, went through the most appalling privations and abuse. Mary Wollstonecraft, who lived in my constituency, dreamt of the rights of women. The suffragettes fought for the rights of women and received the most appalling abuse, but they won. And so I think if we're strong enough in our beliefs, strong enough in what we want to achieve, we can overcome those people. We just don't reply to them in kind. We reply to them with kindness and say, you don't understand what you do. Thank you very much.
Now, but it's been a wonderful evening, I'm sure you'll agree, and a fantastic man standing next to me on the right here. I think he's going to be our new leader, and I'm looking forward to it. Far as those we can coach Jeremy's health. Yes.
Oh, brilliant. Oh, it keeps going back 2 minutes. No, that's funny. Wonder what you do now.